Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the University of KwaZulu-Natal Teaching and Learning TV, which is a pilot initiative envisioned to promote public discourse on higher education issues. We are streaming this from the 8th Annual University Teaching and Learning Conference, and we are very pleased this morning to be speaking to our first keynote speaker, Professor Gayatri Spivak, and we have a panel of distinguished scholars who wish to engage with Professor Spivak on her keynote address, but also in general, the thrust of her work in this field. We actually experienced an intellectual feast this morning, and Professor Spivak was just saying she doesn't speak in sound bites, but there were a few gems, I think, that caught many of us. No toolkit for a moral metric, I love that, or slow cooking of the soul, the creation of the Subaltern Intellectual. I think each of us were inspired in different ways by the keynote address. And so what we've done is we've gathered some scholars who would like to engage with you, and I would like them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about where they come from and their interest in this particular work. Shall we start with Mershen, maybe?
Okay, so my name is Mershen Pillay. I currently work at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I'm located in health sciences, and I work specifically with people who have communication disorders in the discipline of speech pathology and audiology. So I'm particularly interested in understanding, and would like to get your thoughts on this, understanding disability as part of the subaltern.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mershen. Vivienne?
I'm Vivienne Bozalek. I am working at the University of the Western Cape, where you came 20 years ago.
I do remember.
And my partner was having a back operation, so I was very disappointed that I couldn't see you then. And then I missed you again at the University of Cape Town. But my background is in social work, and we also started women's and gender studies in 1995 at the University of the Western Cape. And I'm now the Director of Teaching and Learning, but I'm particularly interested in the political ethics of care and social justice in relation to higher education and other issues. So your work is of great interest.
Great. Thank you.
My name is Crain, Soudien, and I'm an administrator and a still want-to-be scholar at the University of Cape Town. And I've missed you on both occasions you've been to Cape Town. I am deeply involved and concerned about this puzzle, and I'd really like us to talk about it. The puzzle, if you like, of the urgency of living in the modern, and all the extraordinary capacities that people need to be living in the modern, and you know, the still urgent issue on the other hand of recuperating that which you've now referred to as the cognitively damaged. And I'd like us to talk about this cognitive damage a little. It's a term that I think that bothers me a little bit, because I'd like to think that in the stream of all of these difficulties that many people through the world are going through, that they've been able to not only survive this cognitive onslaught, but to read it and live through it in ways which enable them to hold on to a sense of dignity.
So, you have lots that people want to know. I should also say that my name is Sarojini Nadar, and I come from the field of gender studies and religion studies, so I have also a very vested interest in your work. But I think we have much to talk about. There's issues of disability that has been raised, issues of social justice, the issue of the urgency of the modern in the light of the cognitive damage, and I think that term is being problematized a little bit. I'd like you to pick up wherever and people to engage where they can. So perhaps whichever one you would like to pick up first.
I'll be a good student and try to gain at least an A- this oral exam. And you see, so I'll just take the questions as they've come. Disability, yes, I think if we understand the word subaltern to mean this lack of access to structures of welfare, social mobility, I think that there is certainly a claim that the disabled can bring. And I think what one also has to, and this is why I liked your intervention, that there is a sense among the ones who are themselves not very well placed in society, there is a sense, there is an attitude toward the disabled that isn't always a good one. On the other hand, there is at the same time an attitude of almost a great deal of respect toward the disabled because they have been touched. Both exist all around the world, among the uneducated. But to think of this as disability, that's what one tries to undo. Because of course there are also so-called disabled students among the landless illiterate groups that I teach. And the attitude is very different from the attitude at Columbia, where I also teach. That's my one advantage, that I really teach at two ends of the spectrum. And it is possible to make people change their minds in this way. I'll just say one small thing and then pass on to what you spoke of. The idea of producing the subaltern intellectual. If we think of the subaltern as the disabled here, and that's a very wonderful insight, because in many ways women have been thought of as disabled in a certain sense, right? The subalterns themselves have been thought of as less gifted than we are. That is a disability, you know. So, I mean, this is a bad ideological description of the disabled, but it has happened. If we do that, then we think of the way Antonio Gramsci, who thought of the world, the way he suggested that the intellectual, you and me, us, we should instrumentalize ourselves in a master-disciple relationship where the master is the environment of the subaltern. So that what I was talking about in my speech, I'm sure people have written good theories about it. I've learned it in the field, and that's what I was giving with humility, that you have to be able to access the space from within which the other is learning. And I believe it holds, and this is the master-disciple relationship. Learn how to teach this particular group. And I think it holds very strongly with the so-called disabled. Yes.
That's quite interesting I mean, drawing that intersectionality between disability and the subaltern. You'd be interested to know in South Africa we have a ministry called Women, Children and People with Disabilities, all in one. So the understanding that women are disabled, children have, that somehow if you don't know what to do with the subaltern, you sort of put them all into one category and respond in that way. I think that that approach, that intersectional approach, is crucial to subaltern studies. Would you?
Yes, I would certainly agree. There isn't just the one thing that we must, I think, watch out for, and really everything I say can be questioned because this is not my academic specialty, it's my practical work I'm talking about. As you know, my academic specialty is French, German, and English of the long 19th century. So I have learnt this in the field. And so I would say that the one thing to watch out for is to say, I am a subaltern. If you can say, I am a subaltern, then you ain't a subaltern. That's the whole thing. What we were talking about there, about over-politicization. The idea that this, if you can say I'm a subaltern, you've already brought your subalternity to crisis. And therefore, you have to begin to think of yourself as the menders rather than the mended. And this is a very important move for us educators, for the people who are coming from elsewhere. Vivienne, correct me if I'm wrong, but was I thinking, were you talking about the political ethics of gendering?
Well, the political ethics of care, you know, looking at the ethics of care from a political perspective, what a caring institution would be, how one could use that in public policy. But I'm not really so much interested in engaging in that now. I've been trying to understand your work and looking at your latest book, and what intrigued me was this notion of double bind. And because of studying psychology, I remember the so-called schizophrenogenic mother, and how she puts her child in this impossible situation, sort of being very cold but saying, "I love you." So I was trying to get my head around how you're using this and how you're using it as an alternative to strategic essentialism. So I would like really to hear more about it. It's intriguing.
I'll do my best.
Thanks.
But see, strategic essentialism was something that I devised in bad faith. I had been asked to theorize the South Asian historians group, Subaltern Studies, a male group. Now, I'm 72. I had to come up in a world where I had to prove I was as good as the men, including my first French cricket team, where I was the only girl. It was called French cricket because why French, I don't know. But we played on the street. We obviously had no wickets or anything. Our wickets were palm trees and so on. So we had different rules. No wicket could fall. But the thing that I had to do was grit my teeth. A damn cricket ball comes and hits me in the leg because I'm the only girl. I can't show that I cried. Now, that is a very different world from the one we live in today. I mean, I'm talking about the educated middle class. I'm one of the children of that group. So therefore, in that kind of a situation, with this male group of historians, among them Ranajit Guha, who is now 91, and also only a literary critic, and those are historians. They had actually asked me to come and theorize them. I read their material, and I thought that they had, and I was at that time doing French theories of the critique of humanism in a certain way, and I thought that they had this unexamined notion of subaltern consciousness. On the other hand, I was not courageous enough thank God I didn't, because I was wrong. I was wrong every way. So this is the 80s. So I didn't have the courage to say, and especially since I lived in the United States, I was not a real Indian, etc. I didn't have the courage to say to these crack historians that according to my theoretical convictions, you're doing something wrong here, subaltern consciousness. So I wrote, how clearly I remember that they were being essentialists strategically. Okay? Now, this has led to people actually being identitarians.
Yes.
That is the only essentialism that anybody has taken. No, nothing else.
Yes, it's extraordinary, actually.
Being identitarians, in fact, doing that kind of divisive identitarian stuff and claiming that they're only working strategically and undoing democracy into voting rights. That particular thing really scared me.
Yeah, can I just say that I mean, I try to use critically that concept that you deployed, and in response to exactly what you're talking about, the way in which identity was being mobilized, and particularly in the United States. And it's a very emotional thing because you can see how black people in the United States remain subjects of incredible oppression. And this sense of having to recover a sense of dignity in this thing that is being despised so much, you want to accord a right to on occasion. But it gets constituted in such a problematic way thereafter that there's no escape from it.
It's not a good thing, because if you win, then you become a sub-oppressor. You don't, it's not a good thing. And I can say this with confidence because of W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yes.
I work on his work.
Yes.
I'm coming from Ghana,
Yes.
his private library, and his best book,
Yes.
I think, Black Reconstruction. He warns again. In fact, when a different
Yeah.
Negro labor union
Yeah.
was established, he wrote, Du Bois,
Yes.
I quote, that this was the first blow against democracy.
Yeah.
The labor should not have been given.
Yeah.
So to an extent, that's where I went, I felt that I had not done a good thing.
Yeah.
And it's still claimed, and because there's also such a valorizing of theory unfortunately, at the universities. Theory is a practice, no one knows that. Theorizing.
Yes.
But
Of
there
course.
is such a valorizing
Of
of those who
course.
do theory that these strategic users of essentialism,
Yeah.
they did not think of the difference between theory and strategy. What it came to was, we are talking for our own identity, we have a voting bloc, but we are also doing that kind of high theory. That was what it became.
Yeah.
And so that's not, I withdrew it in 1993.
Yes.
There's a long
Yeah.
discussion. But the double bind, yes, I understood it from Bateson's
Yeah.
early work, where contradictory instructions come to the child, so the mother says, look how much I love you, and holding the
Yeah.
child outside the window.
That's right.
I'm not dropping you. Or saying that if you do this, I will hate you. On the other hand, if you don't do this, I will hate you.
Yeah, so
This
you're
is
in
the
an
typical
untenable
double-bind.
position.
So, on the other hand, Bateson went on to see that also this kind of sense also inhabited the extremely gifted people who were not even children, grown-ups, adults. And then from that, one began to realize that, in fact, this is what living is like, because after all, the biggest double mind, one is alive and dying at the same moment. So, in fact, you cannot play the double mind, but you have to make decisions. So therefore, the one good thing that comes out of it is that you know that when you are making a decision, you are transforming a double bind into a single bind, good, bad, and you're making a decision, and therefore you know, as good politicians, activists, parents, you name it, they always know that this is not going to stick unless I follow through on the other side in another way in a little while. This is an extreme, it's wisdom that's followed by people who won't necessarily, when they talk the double bind, but in their walk they show that they know. So that the ethical sentiment, the typecase ethical sentiment, is regret and remorse, not self-congratulation, because down the line you'll have to do more. That
Yeah.
thing to undo, because you have to choose. You can't be ethical
Yeah.
towards the whole world.
So do you think that's what a true intellectual is then? Somebody who is conscious of this?
I don't think you have to be an intellectual for this, because this is also, this is why the word wisdom is a little bit different from being an intellectual. Sometimes, in fact, intellectuals are very adamant in holding on to their opinion, and that is, in fact, a very strong indication that they're not going to be able to open themselves to the dangers, the exhilaration of the double bind. So that's...
And in a sense, that always comes through in the South African context, race and gender. In India, caste and gender. I mean, that double bind that we're constantly having to negotiate in the practicalities of everyday life, not just in the intellectual, but perhaps to come back to your question of the urgency of the modern and cognitive damage. I think, perhaps you could expand a little bit on this notion of cognitively damaged and and why, in a sense, I mean, why all our interventions seem, in this area of cognitive damage, seem almost fruitless. Almost like we can never really know because we're trying to do something that doesn't quite match what is needed.
I wouldn't put too much emphasis on the phrase, you know, because first of all, you must realize that these words are also used in a specialized sense. In fact, you know what we're talking about. And I'm not using them in the specialized sense. I'm using them. I have never written a book about this work that I've been doing now for just about 30 years. Why? Because, and I have written many books, as you know, and I like writing. It's not a secret that I do this work, not because of that, but because I feel that if I take my focus away from learning to learn how to access damaged knowing machines so that I can teach, I am focused on how am I going to transcode this for an academic audience who's never going to put themselves in such situations. I'm going to lose it. So therefore, let's not make it let's just remain with what I've learned in the field, and then you can use more colloquial words if you like. I think you've brought up an extremely important point, dignity. See, what one has to be able to recognize, and here I'm in agreement with you, is that dignity is not always identical with a head that is allowed to work at real intellectual labor. See, there is a certain kind of, I won't call it anger, but there's a good Bengali word for it, Abhiman. It's a kind of feeling that I don't want your help. Leave me alone. I'm a human being. I'm dignified. I want to be able to say no. That particular thing one does recognize, but the damage can't be just dismissed, because if it is dismissed, then we are not taking responsibility for historical crimes. We are not taking responsibility. Who can deny that the caste system has made it impossible for the lower echelons to have the right to intellectual labor? This is a fact. If one simply says dignity is preserved anyway, might as well burn the universities. Then, and some even say, because of suffering there is dignity. Okay, and let's just make them suffer. So therefore, practically speaking, I don't want to use a technical word, but speaking in English, I have to remember all my work in that context is in Bengali. So in fact, when I say intellectual labor, in English it's heavy duty, whereas when I use Bengali, I will use the word matha, head, khatano, making work. Okay? This is a word, this is a phrase that's completely accessible to the subaltern. Intellectual labor is something else. So you have gotor, body, khatano, manual labor. And this is a very different project, which when it's translated into academies, cognitive damage, as you say, yes, it's a very heavy sounding phrase. No, I just mean that I'm with human individuals, children, whose analytical skill, for example, has been destroyed. They're not dumb. I'm with them all the time. I don't know if this video conference can welcome just a small example, because I'll give you the simplest example, right? And remember, these kids you can see rage in their eyes because they know they should be able to do it, okay? So Bengali has diacritical marks that you put on consonants, okay? So you are trying to teach this. Koi akare ka, khoi akare kha, goi akare ga, moi akare ma, poi akare pa, okay? Po, the consonant, you put an a, it becomes pa, okay? You go like this, and then you stop. Tale, no akare, no akar. They can't tell. There's an absolute stoppage in analysis. I mean, absolute, even the adults can't tell. This is not because they're dumb. It's because the analytical skills, memory, everything has been undone because obedience is the only thing. And I keep having to tell them, don't obey me. I won't stay here long enough. So just have patience and try. Intellectual labor is hard to mathakatanu. That's what the warlocks do, the upper classes. So therefore, that there is damage, you cannot deny. The idea of dignity is not consonant with the ruined head. And that's where the real tragedy comes in.
And in a sense, that's the dangerous supplement, isn't it, that you were talking about earlier, that has to be put onto the toolkit systems, if you like, of higher education. It's this understanding, this transdisciplinarity, in a sense, that has to occur in order to engage at that level of the cognitive
But
damage.
it's a different kind of trance, though.
Yes.
Because it's a trance, almost ontological thing, which I think that we're needing to find the words for. I don't think we've got the words for, this scope that you're talking about, the scope of what you're talking about, because I think there are many people who still have that capacity. I don't think they're damaged. I think they're people who still are able to invoke the beauty of the logics for higher order thinking in the very distinct kinds of spaces in which they find themselves, and which is what our languages of description are not able to recognize. We can't recognize them.
I just want to comment on that. It's interesting you asked the question about cognitive damage, because working in academia and being a health practitioner myself, one of the things that disturbs me often is the way in which metaphors from health and illness has been used to pathologize students and learners. And that's throughout, and I was interested in your resistance to that immediately, to saying not to exploit that as a concept, because I hear why that's a dangerous thing to do. And yeah, I think it's something in academia we tend to do very, very often. We look at learning and educators who don't make it as wronged and as sick and ill. And I don't know how, and I hear the thing about language also, I don't know how we're going to reconcile that. We don't have an alternative lexicon for that, in a sense, currently.
Let me say one thing, however. I'm talking very practically. I'm certainly able to understand the poetry of this kind of access to logic, the beauty of a certain kind of logic, and I talk about it too. In, for example, the case of the Nayangiri people and the bauxite miners and the Supreme Court as to the Nyongiri. The Nyongiri folks had also an understanding of a certain kind of law and so on. But I'll not romanticize the students who are trying, who are learning the state curriculum, completely destroyed because neither the teachers nor the students have, in fact, the kind of freedom of thinking that we got in the same, with the same curriculum and the same textbooks, like falling off a log. So this is, that's why I'm working for them. You see, when I started teaching in 1965, I got a tenure-track job. I was only 23 years old. I was an assistant professor and became at University of Iowa. I was going to teach graduate school. So I spoke to the monk, Swami Pavitrananda, who's a Vedantist, so as close to an atheist as you can be and still remain a monk. He was my friend. Okay, so I said to him, Swamiji, I am extremely scared. I'm just 3 years out of 1964 MLA, I got the job. I'm just 3 years out of India, and we were Bengali speakers. I learned English in school. We didn't speak English at home. I'm going to teach graduate students. I'm going to have to teach French poetry, this and that. I'm very scared. And he said to me, just remember, of course, he was speaking of a different kind of domestic service profession. That's thankfully gone now. But he said to me, don't forget that you're teaching for money. You are your student's servant. And you remember that the master's children are even scolded by this. That's the old domestic service profession. Even scolded by the servants and so on. As long as you remember that you're your student's servant, you will not get lost, you will not be afraid. The moment you begin to think you're their guru, all is gone, your life will be destroyed. And now that was 1964, that was a long time ago. Believe me, with these people, and also the Columbia folks, but they treat you like a servant at Columbia because you're just a humanities teacher, the other kind of servant. But I remember David Miller saying to Brooke Holmes, I'm not your valet. But at any rate, but in the villages, that perception, that the tough practicality of bringing these folks into, they vote after all. And if you don't vote with the understanding of logic, etc., their votes are bought and sold. It's the world's largest democracy. And I vote as well. I vote in India. So that's the implacable arithmetical equality of democracy. And that's what I'm doing. I'm really not trying to recognize, because they're like my brothers and sisters. And so there's no problem there recognizing anything, because when I'm at home. On the other hand, they also know that I don't think I'm they. And just the other day, sitting under that banyan tree when we were talking about the farmers' cooperative, I was saying to them, because they are divided among themselves, I was saying to them, okay, one race, Bengali of course, ek jat, which is also the word for caste. So one race, I'm the same race as you. I don't touch you, but I'm the same. Of course I touch you. I'm the same race. What race? So somebody says, Manush, human. I said, okay, one race. But divided into what? There they know. Rich and poor. I said, yes, and don't forget, you're poor, I'm rich. See what I mean? So to an extent, my relationship with them is a laughing relationship, a serving relationship. You know, and by chance, I ate a slice of tomato from one of their plates because he wasn't going to eat it, and it was on the side. If he had mauled it, I wouldn't have eaten it from my sister's plate. But it was right there, and I ate it. There was I mean, I've been with them for 30 years, but there was this huge silence. And 75 seconds, and then we all start roaring with laughter. And I said, you haven't changed. You are still untouchables. I eat from your plate. A Brahmin has eaten from an untouchable's plate. And the world has ended. Eh? We should be ashamed of yourselves. So we're all laughing. So the relationship is easy. There's no lack of dignity there. But on the other hand, practically speaking, they've got to get into the science streams. They've got to get out into the world and not be ruined just working in other people's fields, in the sun, even the women in the sun putting the seeds in and then being paid much, much less than the minimum wage, because nobody there knows that the minimum wage is not supposed to be for everyone, not just the government. So in that situation, it's hard to just kind of say that there are no words for their what they do, because I do know what they do understand. And if I really wanted to go on and destroy our time outlines, this is the soundbite thing, I could give you examples on that side as well.
But in that relationship is the creation of the subaltern intellectual, isn't it? It's within that relationship that the subaltern intellectual is being created, as I see it. But how does that function in Columbia? You know, you were talking about learning to learn how to teach the subaltern intellectual. How does that function in Columbia? How does that function at UKZN for us? Where is that subaltern intellectual?
It's hard because, you know, I'm not teaching the subaltern at Columbia.
That's what
I'm teaching the elite. But in that situation, there are people who will present themselves as subaltern. Now, there, and I must teach my students in such a way that I'm not dismissing them or I'm not destroying them. I have to learn to agree with them. And I can see, as you were saying, I can see where the feeling of subalternity is coming. There is subalternization now. For example, the occupiers of Wall Street, they came towards me. I never go towards anything unless I'm called on. Even these schools I didn't establish until a middle class activist from one of those areas, because you saw how I was constantly giving little instructions to everyone. He said, Didi, open some schools here. And he sent a budget. And even then for 3 or 4 weeks, I said, I don't want to do this because I will never be able to get out of it. And I was right. I haven't been able to. But so the occupiers came towards me and I spoke to them. And I tried to explain to them that this concept of subalternization, which Gramsci came to only when in prison he was speaking to his wife, writing to his wife and his sister-in-law with the women, he came to understand that one can be subalternized if one is, when you dismantle the welfare state, you create in the United States 99% and 1%. That's subalternization.
Yeah.
That's what the Arab Springers rose up against, subalternization. Either the dismantling of the welfare state or taking away, so no access to the structures of the state, subalternization. So that is understandable. But when people claim I'm a subaltern because my parents were working class, that's not quite correct. Because one should recognize that the ones who are wearing mink coats, wearing trench coats with mink linings and come from, you know, the old Ivy League tradition, that they are different, yes, but the situation is not to say I'm a subaltern. It's a so there is a difference, but it's hard for me because I do not share. Remember, I'm not just producing the subaltern intellectual. I am able to see, which Gramsci wasn't, because of his circumstances, that the elite have also been, let me use that word, more happily, damaged.
Yes, of course.
You know, so therefore, I say to them, you think, because I have self-selected students, right? You think the superpower has destroyed everyone else, but somehow not you. What? You're gods? Why do you think? Why do you think you are suddenly different?
And you see that coming in whiteness studies, in studies on masculinity,
You know,
etc.
yes,
that recognition,
and environmental studies, where you look at the modules and you will see, and I really do look at, I mean, you saw, I prepared myself because I was going to talk about the QEP. So I was, in the environmental studies, the bottom line is investment. So who is the subject of this Millennium Projects and environmental studies and so on? That's situated in the Earth Institute at my university. And I'm not against anyone, but it's very hard for me because if I follow Gramsci, I have to take that environment as my master and be the disciple so that I can access them, so that I can say yes to the enemy, share their presuppositions, make them my own and move it from inside. So in a society where people think that creating your own image so that it will sell well is human nature, you have to be with it in order to move it, rather than go that way, either below or above. Below there isn't that sense at all. A little bit of it wouldn't hurt. But above there is nothing but that, you know, and follow the money. Fundraising is activism. I mean, this Daniel Pearl music, etc. Who do you think will create harmony as a result of that music? The Human Development Index people are only people who are who have integrity toward the discipline of statistics. The statistics collection is done very well, they tell you. But they have forgotten that when Mahbubul Haq established the Human Development Index in the 90s, he brought in education and life expectancy in order to make it human. In the last report, the Rise of the South, 2013 report of the Human Development Index, these wonderful statisticians are saying, we think that, not even thinking about why it's human, we think that education and life expectancy are bad ways of producing good statistics because they're too slow. So we would like to suggest that the you go check it out, it's right at the end, that the Human Development Index be produced without those two items. Now, so
They're
therefore,
such good indicators.
you know,
There's
I mean,
no slow cooking of the soul.
I quote. So these are the ways in which I have to work on top. Damaged because of this, as I said, digital idealism, no right to intellectual labor, trivialization of the humanities. I mean, New York Times education sector talking about what kinds of things are open to students. New York Times education supplement says, I am not talking about the humanities, I'm talking about real subjects. So in a situation like that, I have to say we'll never be cash cows. Think of ourselves as epistemological and cultural health care for the whole society. So that way of approaching you can only do by identifying with their values and keeping yourself afloat so that you can enter, you do not accuse them, you do not excuse them, you enter so well that you find something where you can stand and turn it around for use. So that's another soundbite. And don't accuse, don't excuse. Enter thoroughly, earn the right, turn it around for use, knowing where to turn.
Yes. And on that note, on the humanities, perhaps it's not the issue of no toolkit for a moral metric, but perhaps creating a new toolkit from our side so that we speak the same language. It's the translation of it, isn't it? I think that's all we have time for. So I would like to thank you very much for your time. Thank you for engaging with our scholars. I think we've enjoyed this discussion with you. And perhaps we'll have some time over the social events to talk some more. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.